guess we should get started. I don't know if the rabbi will be here or not. I haven't seen anything in email, but let me get started. I'll say our opening prayer in English this time. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. You have sanctified us through your commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves in things of Torah. Amen.
Amen.
Well, we see that the story.
Can I do my quotation?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, David. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Today again is from Van Gogh, and there are two letters that he wrote that I'd like to refer to this morning. One week he wrote to Bernard, his friend, and said, "A starry sky is something I should like to try to do. Just as in the daytime, I present a green meadow spangled with dandelions." And then later he wrote a letter that I just yesterday to his brother Theo. He said, "In the whole of life, is the whole of life visible to us, or do we in fact know only the one hemisphere before we die? For my part, I know nothing with any certainty, but the sight of stars makes me dream. In the same simple way as I dream about the black dots representing towns and villages on a map. Why, I ask myself, should the shining dots in the sky be any less accessible to us than the black dots on the map of France?" He brings the sky so beautifully home that way.
Yes.
Very much.
Excellent. You know, I don't know when the last time it was that anyone ever looked at the painting Starry Night. And I've often wondered, there are a lot of commentaries about it, but one of the things I'm impressed with those around each bright star, there is a swirl.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if Monet tried to paint the wind.
It is a good interpretation, Marty, a very good interpretation. But there is the major swirls are kind of in the center of the painting. And I have a feeling that he was remembering Lord Ross's sketch of the Whirlpool Galaxy done through at the time the biggest in the world.
Fascinating.
The only thing is that it's backwards. But Van Gogh often painted things through mirror. He might have done the same
Van
thing.
Gogh. Yes.
It's just a lovely, lovely, lovely painting.
Thank you for correcting me too in a very kind way, because Van Gogh and Monet, they are two of my favorite artists. And yes, Don.
And he may also have just needed a corneal transplant. You know?
Actually, I'm going to refer you to the Tate Gallery. They had an exhibit. Oh, help me, David. It's an English painter. Everything is very regimented in his paintings, but it is always a very luminous appearance to the image. That is true cataracts. Okay, and it's another way of thinking of that. But yes, with cataracts, sometimes the lights are very prominent as a result of cataracts.
You might be thinking of Constable, Marty?
Constable is one, yes. Thank you. But I think that it's interesting from, but let's go back to our reading. And hi, Rabbi.
Good morning, Shabbat Shalom. My computer didn't want to wake up this morning.
Oh.
Wait a minute, it's Shabbat.
Did you have to give it some coffee?
Not sure what I had to give it other than a little click.
So we are it's interesting in this portion of Torah, in the book of Exodus, we seem to be going back and forth with the dealing with the Passover service and the 10th plague, and the Israelites leaving Egypt. It's a very interesting way of writing, going back and forth. Something that is statements from God and a particular service that we will be celebrating for all time to this day, and also and also the event that starts this entire change in the life of the Israelite people, and in that going from slavery into freedom. And so I just think it's just a very interesting play back and forth. Rabbis, any comments on that, about this play back and forth between the role of God, the Passover service, and the birth of Israel as a nation?
You're asking
Yeah,
me?
I'm not aware.
Of course they do.
Sure, right.
Perhaps not in the way that you're inquiring. In other words, they didn't see, the rabbis of old don't see a problem in, well, we're gonna hit the pause button on this way of looking at the story, and we're going to approach the rituals for a while, and then we're going to come back to the narrative, and then we're going to go back to reminding everybody about this, and then we're going to come in. They didn't see a problem with that. I mean, we from the standpoint of biblical criticism or literary analysis might say, why is that happening? Who decided to do that, and what reason? And that's certainly a question that we could address. Why do we think that the editors of the anthological process, why did they do that, rather than just saying, okay, these chapters, straight through delay or demonstrate the narrative, and then these chapters straight through demonstrate the various rituals and ceremonies? We could probably hypothesize on some of that, but if you're asking me about the ancient commentaries and whatever, they didn't see a problem or a distinction, because everything came and related to God, and therefore it's God's decision as to how the revelation and the instruction, the Torah in its general sense, how the Torah would be transmitted.
Okay. Some people have commented about a combination of different interpretations, the J, the E, the P,
Sure.
and it seems that that's another way of looking at this, these variations, because even what we're about to read today is a slight variation on what came before, and they attribute it to different authors.
Who could have been writing at different times,
right,
already with their own what we would say today hidden agenda, or addressing the people amid different circumstances. One writer could have been addressing those who were much more knowledgeable and much more literate. The others could be more of the peasant class, if you will. Any number of explanations.
very good. Thank you very much. Yes, Don.
If I may, I'd like to revisit a question I had a couple of weeks ago, and I'm glad you're here, Rabbi Norm.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
It has to do with the Hebrews, where God instructing the Hebrews to borrow from their neighbors gold, jewels, and raiment. And that's stated 3 times in Exodus that I've found. And it's been nagging, I'll almost say tortured me this last couple of weeks because it's so fundamental to this whole scenes in these chapters of Exodus. They're just so fundamental to Judaism, especially right before Passover. And so I did looked up the Midrashing on this, and Rabbi, you said the Hebrew was borrowed from the neighbors.
Well, it's to ask.
Okay.
Right. It's to ask as opposed to request.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Right. And there may be a subtle difference, but the Hebrew word that's translated as, or the verb that's translated as request is also the source of the word for please in Hebrew. Okay, if you know the Hebrew word bivakasha, it comes from please, which also comes from the verb or the root that means to request, as opposed to ask, which has a certain underlying premise of um, um, uh, really expecting an answer.
Huh.
I don't know how to, like so Marty reminded us that we're coming up on the Haggadah experience and in the Seder. And if you talk about the 4 questions, those are the Arba She'elot, which is coming from that same word of to ask rather than to request. I don't know if that's helpful, Don, but
Well, it is partially, but to take it another step forward, there's no record that I can see of whatever was given in response to the ask was ever paid back. And so
was ever paid back, you said?
back. And so
reimbursed.
I did a quick calculation, and if the whole contingent of Hebrews borrowed a penny each in value, that would be about $10,000 for all. And so in present day value, with 1% interest to today, we're talking about $500 trillion, which is more than the gross world product that is still owed by the Hebrews to the Egyptians that they asked for. So I find, and it turns out that this question has been not only midrash, but also thrown back and forth over the net by all kinds of theologians. And that nobody, and it's never been decided what ever happened.
Right.
A lot of wealth, and not only that, it was transferred after all but one plague had been accomplished. And the Hebrews are taking credit for all this devastation. Our God is inflicting this on you. And by the way, could we have some jewels and raiment and gold? So the whole thing, it's so disturbing to me because as a Jew, I don't like to feel so uncomfortable that this is right at the root of the beginning of modern Judaism.
There's much more to this. There's much more to this, Don. First, Helene has a comment. She's been trying to get a word in edgewise.
The word is, I'm so grateful to be home. I came home last night.
Yay.
And I really have to leave with happiness in my heart and gratitude for all of you, for the holidays, and for God's will whatever God determines is right is what we do. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
There you go.
I need to interject one thing. In addition to God bless you, Helene, I'm happy that you're home. And 2 days in advance, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Birthday.
On my birthday, I tell you, I'm grateful to be alive at my age and to be happy to be part of you. Thank you, dear. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Helene.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to toss something out for discussion.
Marty, can I
Sure, go ahead, Rabbi.
I'm sorry, but I wish I could remember where I saw it, but it's in a collection of more modern midrash rather than classical midrash. And when I talk about midrash, or when I teach midrash or study midrash, the premise is filling in the blanks. Okay, what are the missing words? What are the missing voices, etc. And I saw midrash. Oh, this Don's questioning and just reminded me of it. I guess I saw it last fall that there are words or there are facts missing from that that phrase that the Israelites asked, requested, borrowed, whatever from the Egyptians. And this midrash fills in the blank to make it sound as if the Israelites are asking for reparations. Okay, we were your slaves for all these years, and da 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 da, and now we've been under whatever circumstances we have permission to leave. Okay, how are you going to pay us back for all those years of slavery, of what we did? Now, granted that modern midrash is written in the context of modern questions, even in American society, but and that way it links to a more classical midrash that the Israelites were asking if the Egyptians wanted to come with them, and those who came with, depending on which way you want to see it, either they brought gold, silver, whatever along with them, and to help purchase provisions for the journey, or it was good riddance. No, we're not going with you. Here, take this and be gone, kind of thing. So I remembered that one about, and again, in the modern context of reparations, that may be another way of looking at it.
And in the text, on the one hand, God hardens Pharaoh's heart against the Hebrews, but in relation to the ask, he says that he will soften the neighbors' hearts.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a flip there.
There's a little bit of a difference between the despot and the citizenry, eh?
Yeah. So it's the reparations confuses me a bit, because the reparations are not coming from Pharaoh. It's coming from your next door neighbor.
Yep. Okay.
Anyway, I will continue on this, and I didn't mean to take up half the Torah study on it, but it's really working on me. So.
Okay, well, it's good to question, but as the rabbi was alluding, there are a lot of empty spaces, and I think that the empty spaces, contrary to what our modern way of looking at things, every space must be filled. The empty spaces give us room to ask questions. And it's worthwhile to ask the questions and discuss them because they're to give us room for thought. Today, every second of every moment has to be filled with sound of some sort. And even if it's too quiet, there are apps you can purchase that will fill in sound. And that's not the way the world is. I'm reminded of songs that addressed silence, essays on nature that address science, that address silence, and maybe this is something that we have missed in reading. Many people today read by scanning, and they're just filling time, as opposed to reading the word, sometimes having to reread a sentence. There's no time to reread. And I think that is part of, it's a problem in our society today, because then we don't understand the need for silence or spaces or gaps, pauses, rests. And I think it's very important. There have been, I'm not going to say anything else, but the midrash today is different from the midrash of classical midrash. Maybe we have to fill in every missing piece rather than thinking about it. So anyway, I know yes, Joanne, I know we're digressing, but Joanne, please.
When you started this discussion about ask or request, my mind immediately went to the Psalms. And in the Psalms, you remind God of all the things that God has done for you. And then you ask, you don't really request, you ask, God, you've been with me so long. I really need this request. And it might be, to help somebody that's sick or whatever. But for some reason, prayers to me are usually ask prayers, not request prayers. But it comes from my looking at Psalms.
Very interesting. Very nice. Very nice. Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
Rabbi.
And yet, the most terse and brief prayer in the Torah,
Okay.
is Moses looking up at God and saying, "Please, God, heal her," referring to Miriam,
Mhm.
who was struck with with the leprosy, with the scales, whatever. El na rafan Allah. So I was thinking of that when you were asking. Psalms also, but there. Petition it would be the technical term for the type of prayer that's asking. But I think most people would say, when you're asking for something, it never hurts to add the word please. Right? Or to structure it in, oh God, oh Mom, you make the greatest pot roast, whatever. Can I have something? Can I, right? Add it with praise. Mhm.
Any other comments before we start our reading?
I need to know where we're reading.
Okay. We are in Exodus chapter 12, verse 43.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
So, David, if you would like to start us off.
Yes, I would be happy to. And the Lord said unto Moses and Aaron, this is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no alien eat thereof, but every man's servant that is brought for money, when thou hast circumcised him, then shall he eat thereof. A sojourner and a hired servant shall not eat thereof. In one house shall it be eaten. Thou shalt not carry forth aught of the fresh flesh abroad out of the house, neither shall ye break a bone thereof. All the congregation of Israel shall keep it. And when a stranger shall sojourn with thee, and will keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and keep it, and he shall be as one that is born in the land. But no uncircumcised person shall eat thereof. One law shall be to him that is homeborn, and unto the stranger that sojourneth among you.
Okay,
that-
let's stop there.
Yeah.
And so let's go back, because this is a very specific law to deal with a specific people. Not so let's break this down. First of all, Moses and Aaron are both being told. Is there a reason why both Moses and Aaron are being told this, as opposed to just Moses? Yes, Rabbi.
Well, Aaron and his sons, the priests, they're the ones who make the sacrifice and the remains of the sacrifice available to those who would eat of it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they're the bouncers at the door, so to speak, of who can get in and who can order from the menu.
Okay, good point. Any other discussion? Yes, Gail.
Rabbi, does this, because the word circumcision comes up, women don't get circumcised. So, because they're uncircumcised, does that imply that they're not allowed to, partake of this meal? Or-
No, I think the implication,
It's just been.
I think the implication is that the woman goes along with her husband or father or
Okay.
whoever is in charge of her.
Gotcha.
She's
Okay,
just
so-
property to him at that point.
So
And
that
so
is-
if he
okay,
converts,
Yeah, okay,
she joins in. Mhm.
okay.
I think.
Okay, I think Suzanne and then Don.
At first, it kind of seems shocking. Why can't you share a meal with, a stranger? But in reading it and thinking about it, I think what God is saying here is that if you're not, how do I want to say, in belief of me, then you're not eligible for the Passover. No, in other words, no pagans allowed. That's
Okay,
it.
any comments about that? Yes, Rabbi.
Okay, all right. Suzanne, I don't think it was taken that way. I can understand your thinking. It was taken to refer only to eating of the Paschal sacrifice. It
Right.
wasn't anything else at the meal. It was only specifically the Pesach, the Paschal offering, because that specifically was the reminder of what had happened in Egypt to the children of Israel. And if someone is not a member of the tribe, so to speak, it didn't happen to them. Therefore, this one part of the ceremony, say it in modern terms. If I attend worship at a Catholic church, I don't expect to take communion.
Right.
Right. No, you
Okay.
wouldn't.
Right.
But
Right. It's
actually-
not saying they can't, they shouldn't, they're not welcome to come to the meal. It's only this one part of the
Part of
ritual.
it.
Right.
Right.
But that, in my view, supports what I'm saying, that part of the meal, that sacrifice or communion in a church, you have to be committed to God.
Yes, right,
Yes.
right.
And if you're not, then you can't, be a part of that portion of the meal.
Mhm.
Okay. Don?
Yeah, the Passover celebrates the release from slavery of the Hebrews. So can somebody shed some light on the context of any slave you have bought may eat it? What in the text that the idea of purchasing slaves by the Hebrews, what does that mean?
I have info. Okay, it's interesting as I look at translations in both Friedman and Alter. 1244 says, "And every slave of a man." Some would translate it as serf, but Friedman says it's extraordinary that 2 verses after reporting that Israel went free from Egypt, there is a reference to the possibility of an Israelite having a slave. The Torah does not forbid slavery, nor does it criticize the Egyptians for having slaves, but rather for maltreating their slaves. The Torah initiates a process that eventually is to bring about an end to all slavery on earth for Israelites and for everyone else. Now, it then makes reference to Leviticus 43, actually. 20, Leviticus 25:43. You shall not dominate him. This is a term that's used for human dominion over animals in Genesis 1. Israelites are explicitly denied the kind of power over other human beings, even a slave. Then it goes on with harshness. This is the term that is used for the way the Egyptians made the Israelites work. And that's Exodus 1:14. Eliminating slavery on earth has been a gradual process rather than a revolution. The Israelites are permitted to have slaves themselves, but not in the manner of the Egyptians. They cannot overwork them. They cannot mistreat them. The rules that are imposed on the treatment of slaves in the Torah involve a recognition of a slave's humanity and dignity, and they establish that a slave has rights. This is a crucial first stage in the long process leading to opposition to slavery altogether. Now, you asked about Torah and slavery, so I went ahead and tried to fill it in.
Very good. Excellent. Excellent. Any other comment? Well, one of the, yes, go ahead, Joanne, please.
I'm curious. Can you only start receiving, I'm going to call it the communion, the wafer, at the age when you make your bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah? What age can you start receiving the communion?
Go ahead, Rabbi.
Well, there is no communion
Okay.
in
Okay.
Jewish practice. Okay.
Okay.
But when you talk about bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah doesn't appear in Jewish tradition until 100 years ago last week. So that doesn't count. But bar mitzvah only when you see the word bar mitzvah, just think adult.
Okay.
Okay.
The
All
age
right.
of 12.
That one who is old enough to be obligated or entitled to participate as an adult
Okay.
in Jewish practice. Okay. That's like the age of majority, I think is more of a technical term.
Okay.
Oh, okay. And Marty, can I go back to the slavery question for a
Sure.
second?
Sure,
Okay.
please.
All right. The scholars that I studied with would make the case that when the Torah refers to slaves at this point, those people who were slaves, it's almost a voluntary relationship. Either I want to be part of your family, but I'm not marrying into the family. I want to go where you go, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I will live with your family. I will work for your family. There always were those opportunities to leave, whatever, or this may have been to, in most cases, it was to pay back a debt that might have been owed. It wasn't slavery in the sense of I'm gonna, like we think these days of the slave markets, in the South or whatever, of the owner who would stand in front of a stage and there would be 7 potential servants up on the stage and say, I'll take that one. It wasn't like that. That wasn't the relationship. It was a specific category, and there are different terms for, again, whether it's someone who wanted to live with your family but not convert, not become some part of the people, someone who was repaying a debt, someone who was enslaved. I don't know a better word. Enslaved as a particular punishment by whatever court or judge may have imposed it. But you didn't buy a slave.
Hmm.
The text that we just read
Yeah,
implies that slaves are bought, and it makes a distinction between slaves and hired workers. I find it confusing. I mean, if you buy a slave, then you have to pay somebody else who already owns the slave.
Verse 44.
Again, I think it doesn't mean that the interpretation that I have or that I was taught is the absolute truth, and it may be totally incorrect. But they would translate the phrase not as as a slave who had been purchased, but a slave who had been acquired. And again, there's a difference, because there are other ways of acquiring someone, something other than purchase. Now, maybe that's a cop out. I don't know. But in the context of, like Larry was pointing out from Alter and Friedman, that later on this was a step in moving away from the kind of slavery that the Israelites had experienced.
One of the things I'd like to interject is that in what we had read before, if we take both discussions of the Passover and put them together as a separate entity, in the previous reading about the Passover, it said that this shall be the law for all time. It was very specific, as opposed to just for then. And therefore, if you now take this concept that now that you are free, be sure that you pass this along to your children, so that if in the future they have slaves, then it would be then this would start to make sense. So that if in the future you acquire a slave and have brought them with you to this event, or what you are going to purchase them, or you're going to acquire them, doesn't matter, in the future too, that this is something that I want you to, God's saying, I want you to remember that these are the rules that I would expect you to follow. And not just for those who have left or in the process of leaving, but for future generations as well. Then it starts to make more sense. So I don't know. I'm just going to throw that out. Because if you go back to Exodus 12:14, and I'll just read the second half of 14, you shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord throughout the ages. You shall celebrate it as an institution for all time. So this may be more of, how, if you think about how a slave's going to purchase or hire a slave to a slave, that's going to be a little hard to do. And so maybe this is a reference to the entire remembering period, for all time. I don't know. I just tossed that out to be part of the discussion. Anyway, any other comments? All right. What about it in verse 46? It shall be eaten in one house. The whole assembly of Israel shall offer it. Does it mean a literal house, or the house of Jacob, or the entire community?
I think there is can you hear me all right?
Yes, just your volume is a little low. That's okay.
Okay, I'm thinking that, is that better?
Perfect.
Thank you. Anyway, I was thinking that maybe this is before actually the commandments that were given to build the tabernacle, which literally was the place where all the Israelites gathered.
Yes.
For prayer and for special occasions. And it is the place that God himself said that he could live among the people, which I think is one of the most moving phrases in the entire book of Exodus and entire Bible. And because God wants to be here with us. And I think originally, as we're reading it, it's a literal meaning. I know
Right.
Bruce is smiling. I know he's going to have something to that. Today, of course, evolution has taken place. We, as Jews, have moved on a little bit, and we have multiple seders in many houses. But that would be my interpretation.
Okay. Bruce, Pastor Bruce, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Gotta unmute myself here. Actually, sorry I was late today. I had another Zoom call and it went overtime today. So I'm just getting kind of caught up here, but I like the idea of what David just shared. I think that the idea is that, well, I have to go to verse 47. I know we haven't even read that yet, have we?
Yes, we did.
We did. Okay,
David read it.
I wasn't in on the
You
reading.
came
I
in
don't know how far
as
you
he
got.
was reading.
But in the fairness of that, if you add 47, the whole community is an important aspect of faith. It's one of the most important aspects of faith, and most people don't grasp that. So many people today, especially in America, have this individualized faith. And anyway, it just is, to me, faith has always been about community, and it should continue to remain that way. But that's why you have, you invite the stranger into Passover, because it says no strangers. Well, you can go through all kinds of things here and say, oh, it says this, but we do this. I guess in practice. Because it's, no foreigner shall eat it. Well, if they're visiting and they're a stranger and you're inviting them in, then I suppose they are. So, there's all kinds of stuff here, but I really like the idea of community. I think community is important. And that's why even when you're gathering in homes, having other people with you besides your own family is a blessing every single time. My favorite Passover was 2 years ago. We had our friends from Israel here, and they are away from their family, and we took them in as their family. And it was absolutely beautiful, because they had 3 little girls that were going, are we going to be able to do this? And are they going to hide the afikomen? And there was all these little questions from these girls in Israel. And I said, oh yes, we're going to do all of that. And anyway, so it was a blessing. It was such a blessing. And again, that's what community is all about. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
Very, very good. Okay, I don't know who had hands up first.
We'll give it to Don, and then it'll be David.
Excuse me?
Let Don do his thing, and then I'll take on from him.
Oh, well, I don't know if Suzanne and the rabbi had their hands up. So
that don't worry, don't
okay.
know, whatever.
So
whatever.
Suzanne, is that okay with you?
Yeah, just don't call me late for dinner.
Okay.
Go ahead, Susan. Go ahead, Susan.
Okay, Don.
Yeah, Don, go ahead.
Okay, it seems to me what we're seeing expressed here is a point of unification of the Hebrews, because it seems like the 430 years in Egypt and then this ragtag escape is kind of like a mini diaspora for the Israelites. And then now they're being called together, and circumcision now becomes the identifying factor among males and among the entire tribe. So it seems to me this plants a stake in the ground and says, here's where we start as Jews. That's the way it's going to be. That's how I'm reading this.
Okay. So David, then Suzanne, and the rabbi.
I was thinking, I was actually planning to make a comment based on Pastor Bruce, although I wanted to say that I'm delighted, Pastor Bruce, that you are here today. We missed you last week. But anyway, I wanted to say that in a way, we are having one Seder, even though Wendy and I are having a Seder here, as we always do. And across the street, there's another house, and Rabbi Shem Tov is doing one. Rabbi Norman is doing one. There may be one at the Or Hadash. But in a way, all of these Seders are the same. We are doing it the way it was done back in the time of the Exodus. That's all.
Okay. And so I guess Suzanne and then the rabbi.
I verse 40 is it? And 46, or whichever verse says it should just be one house. That reminds me of when they said about what to do with the blood of the lamb, to put it on the door frame and all. So that act does not cover the whole community. That act only covers that specific house. However, the whole community is supposed to do it. So that's how I was taking these passages, that the promises to the individual family, I guess, who's fulfilling the thing with the blood on the doorway, and that doesn't cover the whole community, but the directions are given to the whole community. So if the whole community does what they're supposed to do, then everyone will be saved.
Very good. Very good. Rabbi, you're on.
The simple answer or clarification that our translations show in one house. Okay, the simplest explanation is that it's not a holiday where you have part of the Seder in one house, part of the Seder in another house, then you go to your in-laws, and then you go to the next, then you go to the next door neighbor, and then you go to Or Hadash, or whatever it is. Each individual is in his or her own house. So it's, Echad is one, but it's also individual. Okay, so it's that, and it kind of smacks at what we think of today when we think of the Seder, just like Bruce, nice beard, incidentally, Bruce, that that we think of today. Oh, it's Passover, it's the Seder. Let's invite as many people as we can think of. The contrary here is that each person, each household had its own observance. That was the intent, as I understand it.
Pastor Bruce.
So in other words, Rabbi, it's not a traveling potluck.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Right. Or, because we like this cook's chopped liver, we like this cook's gefilte fish, we like this person's
right. You'd be going for the matzo ball soup over here, and then go over here.
Exactly. I won't go to that person's Seder because the matzo balls are too hard. Whatever it might be. Okay.
Thinkers.
But again, there's as we're all saying, there's a great inspirational sense of community.
Right.
Even if you're not within the same four walls, but if everyone is participating in the same ritual at the same time, that still serves as community.
And then there was the development of daylight saving time, and switched the times on some of the people. But everywhere, it's fascinating. Think of it like a celebration for New Year. If you were in an SST jet, you would be able to, every 3 hours, celebrate the new year. You could also celebrate Passover, the Sunday, at the same time.
What about the astronauts?
The astronauts multiple times during that day. And
Put on your tefillin multiple times every day.
That's right. Take it off. It's just an interesting thing. Now I have.
Wait, Marty, because most of you were not in the class discussion that I had a couple of days ago when Rabbi Solomon Freehoff was asked that question. Okay, he was asked the question in World War I of American soldiers who were stationed in Iceland, all right, where the night is 6 months long, right? And so the question came up to Rabbi Freehoff as chief rabbi of the expeditionary forces: when do we light candles? When do we have Shabbat? When do we know? And his answer was that you follow New York time, because at that point in 1916, 1917, at that point in time, New York was the center of of the Jewish world, right? And then in the 1950s, he amended that answer and said, choose between New York time or Jerusalem time. If you're in a
Interesting.
situation where the time zones are all thrown off. I just used that in the class on Thursday. So
Interesting. Well, in another question I'm going to raise, and this may be just because, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Joanne.
Well, you can go first. It doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter. You had your hand up, I guess, in
Yeah.
in relationship to what was being discussed.
I have friends that, have family all over the world. And what they do, and this is just for prayer, they all decide, okay, it's going to be a certain time zone. And then everyone prays for just that time zone so that they all have a prayer at the same time. And I find that interesting along with the rest of this conversation.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I think what Pastor Bruce was mentioning about community, that's why Facebook is so helpful to all these people that feel isolated. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you have thousands or millions of friends. Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, and it's almost like a competition. Who can have the most friends on Facebook?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But it fulfills a need that we all have. We all want a community, a community of friends. So I thought it was very interesting there. And Rabbi was saying, have another question. And this, I need some Hebrew translation. In verse 49, it reads, there shall be one law for the citizen. 48, that I jumped over. In 48, it says, after a male must be circumcised, then he shall be admitted to offer the sacrifice. He shall then be a citizen of the country. Does the word is the word in Hebrew for citizen? For country, first for country, in citizen of the country. Is that just have they just anglicized it to change it to nation, to citizen, to country?
No, it's actually of the land.
Of the land.
Right.
And who does? That's what I thought. That's what I thought. So these are just different translations. I'm talking about the Plough translation, and so I just thought it was, but now that we have the word, it's for land. Who is the owner of the land? Yes, Rabbi.
God. God's the owner
right.
of the land.
Right. So it's becoming more important. It's a citizen of the land. However, after the diaspora, we were told it's somehow I remember someone saying, a rabbi saying, that during the diaspora we were told to take on the customs of the country within which we lived at that time. So if the Jew wound up in the United States, you would follow United States law. And if it was if you wound up in France, it would be French law that came before Jewish law. Is that the correct understanding? And then if,
Well, that's what you're describing is an oversimplification.
okay,
The principle as expressed in the Talmud is dina de malchuta dina, that the law of the land, or the law of the kingdom actually, is the law, unless it contradicts
right,
God's law. All right. The question is, law versus mitzvot versus religious practice, et cetera, et cetera. So and there's an entire tractate of the Talmud that's why I said it's an simplification. The New Testament sees it as render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, render unto God that which is God's, recognizing that there
right,
is a distinction. And then the Talmud specifically lists those areas where civil law, let's call it that, civil law would indeed hold sway over religious law. And there, there's a whole tractate that deals with those things. It occurred to me when you were asking about the word land,
mm-hmm,
a citizen of the land, is that also, I don't think it's this early in the Torah, if I remember correctly, but the general population, as opposed to the Kohanim and the Leviim, as opposed to the priests and the Levites, the general population is known as Am Haaretz, the people of the land. And so my guess is that that's the phraseology that this is referring to. So you become, because a ger, someone who's converting, cannot be a Levi or a Kohen. So it's like the technical status of, okay, you're a member of the general population. You're not good, but you're not going to get up into the higher castes.
got it.
That's again, that might be a way of realizing why they have the word haaretz there, because they certainly weren't in Eretz Yisrael. They weren't in the promised land yet.
Correct. That's why I was saying that maybe
Yeah.
some of this is for the future rather than just
or that
for the
coming
again,
out, or
people
that's
coming out.
that was the context in which the term was understood at the time that this was written down.
Right.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And I found in verse 49, there shall be one law for the citizen and for the stranger who dwells among you, so that everybody follows the same rules. Yes, Larry,
Okay, this is from Friedman.
please.
One instruction for the citizen and for the alien. Instruction is the translation of the Hebrew Torah because it denotes both teaching and law. This is the first occurrence of the word Torah in the Torah. It is impressive beyond description that its first appearance is in a verse declaring that a foreigner residing among the people of Israel has the same legal status as an Israelite. The context here concerns the Passover statute, but the principle of treating a resident alien the same as any citizen will be repeated about 15 times in the Torah. So this is profound.
Right. Thank you. Very, very good. Excellent. David, you had your hand up.
I need a minute, and then I'll have a comment.
Oh, okay. Okay, Pastor Bruce.
I was also looking at this with what Larry just shared as well, and it seems as if, from some of the things I'm looking at, is that there was really no, in that time frame, in the ancient world, there was no other legal protection at all for strangers, and that this is a very specialized thing, and so that becomes a very, when it's specialized like that from back then, it also kind of says, okay, if this is for then, I look at that and going, how important is that for now as well? If it's way back then and it's a very specialized thing that was only in Judaism, it should be important enough to carry over. At least that's the way I look at it.
Good point. Any other discussion?
Soon.
Okay. Well, what I wanted to ask Suzanne how much time she needs to does what you have to say fit into this parsha, or did you want to wait a while to until they get a move on, because it's going to this is still a discussion of the ritual.
Well, how long? Well, I think I only need 4 or 5 minutes, although maybe there might
Okay,
be
let's do it
some
towards
questions.
the I'll try to end by in about 45 minutes or so. We'll see where we get. Yes,
Okay.
David.
Okay, David is ready now. I know that it's almost heresy for me to do 2 quotations in one session. But Marty, you mentioned twice the term one law.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And the first time it got me to thinking, but then I thought I can't do a second quote. But then you mentioned it a second time. I think I'd like to add it. It is a critic named Alfred Lord Tennyson, in his most very famous poem, In Memoriam. He talks about one law. And he says he's writing the poem specifically to remember his best friend who passed away. But the very end, the last 4 lines of that long poem read thus: that friend of mine who lives in God, that God, whichever lives and loves, one God, one law, one element, and one far off divine event to which the whole creation moves. He is connecting what you said, Marty, I think, to the idea that all of creation, the entire universe, is irrevocably moving towards a divine event at some point in the distant future. And I think that's what his take would be on what you've been saying about the one law.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. One more question. Why is Passover linked to the here? There's a very strong emphasis on circumcision. Why is this, or in any way, how is this related to a procedure that is described to Abraham in Genesis? If any, because there is so much. Does this mean that there's a that it is important to remember what the circumcision represents, what it symbolizes? And is the Passover, the separation from representing a separation between the Israelite people and Egypt, their Egyptian slavery, let's put it that way, the time in Egypt. Okay, Larry had his hand up first. and then Rabbi, and then Don.
Okay, this one from Ulta. There is a symbolic overlap between the blood of circumcision and the blood of the lamb on the doorpost, and God saving Israel from the bloodbath of Egypt to make his people free. So the theme is blood, the connection.
Okay. Okay. Rabbi?
The Eitz Chaim commentary paraphrases an earlier one. I don't remember whose it is. That they're bookmarks of Moses fulfilling this part of his mission. That before he comes to bring the Israelites out and all the encounters with Pharaoh, Zipporah reminds him about circumcision of their sons and whatever. That's near the beginning of his mission, of his call. And now, once the children of Israel are out to begin their own journey as a people, symbolized by the covenant of circumcision, that it becomes related here at this point as well. Again, Eitz Chaim paraphrases it, but I don't remember who
Okay.
originated the piece.
Very good. Thank you. Don?
I'll come back to my comment about unification, because it was no small commitment for an adult male at that time to submit to circumcision. There was hygiene and sedatives and were just not available. So you really had to be certain. I'm imagining you had to be pretty certain that's what you wanted to go through that.
Okay. But yes, Pastor Bruce.
I was trying to just think through the various covenants.
Yes.
And it seems as if that the relationship we have with God, as David was saying earlier, with the presence and just different things, that there are things of which are covenantal, and God is asking us as human beings to say yes to these things, because, and there's always the becauses in there. And I look at this as what Larry was also saying from his commentaries, that there's definitely a relationship between these things, Passover and circumcision, Abraham and Moses. There's a lot of tie-ins, and I think it's up to us to figure out those. This is important because God initiated it. And I know that's hard. I know some people that's blind faith for some people, that to say, hey, you have blind faith, you're just whatever. But on the other hand, if God initiates something, it must be important, and it must be adhered to, or at least paid attention to in some way, shape, or form. And so that's kind of how I looked at that. Was all these covenants come together, they all intermingle, and there's God initiated things because, and it's our ability to respond to those initiations on how to deal with it.
Very good. Very good. Yes, David.
Yeah, I want to agree with what Bruce was just saying. Very noble comment. Thanks, Bruce. I think, though, that that there is something else to pick up a bit on your comment earlier about the one law. And I think that Tennyson, who I know was a deeply, deeply religious and faithful person, wanted to make the point that the one law applies not only to all people, but to the universe as well. I think he might be making the point that he is connecting us as human beings of all races, of all types to the universe itself. And I think that's why I quoted it. It's a very powerful, I think, interpretation. It may not be correct, but it is surely powerful.
Okay. Can we take it one step further? We spoke about the circumcision representing the covenant. This was over years ago now. And is this one way of saying, I remember my covenant, my side of the covenant, and what are you going to now do honoring your side of the covenant? Because God is doing all of these things, is about to do even more. And is this saying, hey guys, don't forget your part of the covenant? Yes, Rabbi.
Well, I think that could be a nice part of it. And then extend that even one step further, that this covenant is not a racial thing.
Right.
This covenant is open to all who would choose to.
That's
Granted, Don says it's a painful process, both physically and emotionally, but it is available to those who choose it. It's not just that you had to be born into it.
right. So maybe Passover time, we're also asked to remember why the covenant. And are we part of the covenant? I don't know. I just toss that out for thought. Yes, Larry.
If circumcision is done to an 8-day-old boy, it's not that he made a commitment for the covenant and is declaring allegiance to God. It's his parents' commitment. And that's why I think later on we have bar bat mitzvah or other ways for that person to really make the commitment to follow in the religious traditions. But to say that because he was circumcised, he may then decide not to follow. You know, it's really the commitment of the parents, in my point of view.
Okay. Maybe that's why we're commanded to honor our parents. Don't forget why this was done.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Mom. Thanks a lot.
Hey, Jewish people aren't the only ones that got circumcised on the 8th day, and mine was probably the 3rd day. So, but well, it's true. Anyway, this reminds me of just the circle of faith here with myself, because the other thing that happened when I was young, and this doesn't happen in every church, so don't get me wrong, it does happen in the Catholic Church and maybe some other more liturgical churches, that as babies you get baptized. Okay.
Yeah.
I was involved in a church that was like that. You either did a dedication or you did a baptism, and I'm more of the persuasion that you dedicate your children and you don't baptize them, and they make the choice for themselves. A la bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, 13, you can make a decision, you go get baptized at that point. Similar ideas here that are passed down, obviously, from all of this. It all goes into this funnel, and then people come out with something that they believe in. But I actually chose, when I was 21 years old, to be baptized once again because I wanted to remember that it was my decision. And I'm just giving you that as a kind of a idea. Now, would I go to be recircumcised again? No,
We were going to invite the whole congregation.
Oh, golly, that was good. That was good. Well, any other discussion at this point? Okay, I'm trying, I wanted to give Ruth Ann some time, but what I would like to do is go over a little more. We have some time before
Marty,
we.
I think David has a.
David
or
has
maybe
Oh,
I
I'm
think
sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, this actually reminds me of the kinds of questions that are often asked when you try to enter Israel at the immigration at the border. And of course, they're not going to ask you to prove that you've been circumcised, but they have a way of asking questions about your faith. And they did that with me. And they said, do you know your father's Hebrew name? And I said, I certainly do. It's not son, but Zev, my grandfather's name. And he was the guy, the officer was pretty impressive. I knew my grandfather's name as well. But it meant something more to me. It meant that in addition to entering the land of Israel, I was also bringing my father, my parents, and my grandparents with me, even though they're in heaven now. But it was a very special moment. And I looked at the officer and I thanked him. And we had a little conversation and then he led me through. But it was very, very moving to me.
It's an excellent point. I can see why. Very good. Yes, Joanne.
When our children were baptized, all in the Catholic Church, but by different priests, my child was, a special prayer was said over them. A precious prayer was said for me as mother. But none of those priests said a special prayer for my husband. And that has always bothered me. I'd like to change that rule in the Catholic Church because I think it should be the whole family being blessed and prayers said. And he just brought that to mind because he included his parents and grandparents, etc. It's nice.
Very good. Very good. Yes, Michael.
Based on what Joanne just said, it really sparked something in me. And I'll refer back to my show last Sunday. And when I sang in English, my Yiddish mama, I included my father when I did that, see? Because they are a unit and I could not leave my dad out of that because of my thoughts when I sang that song.
Excellent. Excellent. And yes. Yes, Joanne. Okay, the rabbi has had his hand up. Did you want to respond to Michael?
I do.
Okay, why don't you do that, and then I'll let the rabbi have the floor.
Michael, next time include your mother too. When you say it, include not only your dad, but your mother too.
Yeah, well, that's
what he meant.
That's what he meant.
That's what he meant.
The song is about
the mother,
Jewish mother,
but he included his father.
That's right. So he included his father to be part of that.
Right, but how about mom too?
Well, the song is about mom.
Let me explain.
Anyway.
Let me explain to Joanne.
Okay.
The song that I sang I was singing that song in my mom's memory, in the memory of my mother.
Okay.
That's all about my mother, that song.
Okay.
See? And because of my father it's connected there, even though the song is about my mother. I'm singing a song about her, how she attended me, how she took care of me.
Yes.
That song is all about my mom.
Right.
You understand?
Perfectly.
And so when I do that, I thank God I had both of my parents growing up. And so I included my dad in that song because I could not leave him out, because I felt the same way about my mom and my dad equally.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Marty. Thank you, Marty.
Thank you. And Rabbi,
So Joanne, Suzanne, I'm curious. I leave out Bruce because we're talking with the Catholic Church specifically. So Joanne, like you said, at the baptism time,
Mhm.
the child is baptized, and the blessing is for the mother, but leaves out the father.
Yes.
Okay. Are there other moments or other rituals where again, whether one or the other is included or excluded? And I ask that because in Jewish tradition, not so much anymore, but in Jewish tradition, the healing prayer, and we sing it in our service of Misha Berach, but the healing prayer, when a name was given for someone that we prayed for healing for this person who was ill, it was so and so, the son of, but only the mother's name was given, not the father's name. Okay. And when called to the Torah to give the blessing, it was only so and so, the son of, the father's name and not the mother's name.
Interesting.
So I think the answer was that they made a distinction between prayers specifically acknowledging the religious role that the males would play in Judaism, as opposed to the role of God's compassion that represented the feminine side of the divine, and that's why they referred to the mother's name. So I was wondering if there were other rituals, ceremonies, and blessings that also it only had the mother or only had the father.
Yeah.
And it seems like the
Pastor Bruce.
Pastor Bruce has some help here.
I do. I'm going to ask Joanne a question. Joanne,
Okay, better run.
at
Go ahead.
confirmation, who is standing there with the confirmant? At
That
age
is-
13.
It's someone that is Catholic. In other
So it
words,
doesn't have to be the father then either.
No.
Oh no, it doesn't.
Okay.
Definitely does not have to be it doesn't have to be a parent.
Okay, for the confirmation.
That I know.
I don't know that much about
Right.
confirmation in the Catholic Church,
That I
so
know.
I just wasn't sure.
Right.
Okay, the other thing then is that what I see is kind of the part of the father later on is always when it comes to the wedding. The wedding, the father takes over. The wedding, it seems like the dad, especially with a female, takes over the entire thing, and mom's kind of just trailing behind and not talking, and the dad's doing all the talking. At least in the Christian tradition of wedding, that's how that works. I don't know about the Jewish tradition of wedding, but the dad walks the daughter down the aisle. The dad speaks on behalf of the whole family. The dad does all of this. So I don't know whether that answers part of your question. There's something that comes up later and wedding is covenantal in the Catholic Church, certainly, as part of a covenant. So I just didn't know if that would answer your question, Rabbi, about the dad kind of coming into play sometime. That's usually for the daughter, but the dad is also at the reception responsible for usually toasting or doing something at the reception if it's the son part. It's kind of I don't know how that all works, and I've only been to one Jewish wedding, and it was my cousin's, and they smashed the glass and they did all the fun things that they do at the Jewish weddings, but I don't remember who spoke. I just can't remember. But that to me, that was when you get to that point, that usually the dads are a little bit more involved in some way, shape, or form. It seems like, anyway. That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Hey, Suzanne.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm not Catholic, and when I was first baptized, I was an infant. And while my parents were there, it was my godparents who were holding me when the water was poured on my head.
Right.
I don't recall, well, how would I know? I was, I'm not even sure how old I was, to what, 2, 3, 4 months? I don't know. Now I just lost my train. Oh, and when I got confirmed, I don't remember, my parents were not with me up. It was just our class stood up at the altar. I don't remember much about that day. I was starting to head into my rebellion years, so I don't remember all that much. But I do remember being baptized recently, which Pastor Bruce did. And I did not go into the tank of water because I probably would have broken my neck. But it was a lovely ceremony, and for which I'm very grateful and happy that I was able to, make that confirmation.
Okay. Any other discussion? Yes, yes, Joanne.
I guess I just think it's strange. I mean, yes, for my children, we had people there who were promising to bring our children up Catholic, etc. And everyone maybe was blessed. But I just thought if I was to receive a blessing, I guess I thought my husband ought to also. And that just bugs me for some reason, even now, all these years later. One son was just 54, so it's still bothering me 54 years later. But all three priests, nobody blessed the father, and it just seemed like it should be. To me, it was too important not to do that. So there.
Okay. I don't know who had their hand.
Rabbi.
Several different hands.
Rabbi.
Rabbi. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So two things. One, just to put it out there that in our day, in the contemporary Jewish world, mother and father's names are recited more often than not at every opportunity, as opposed to traditionally where what may have been one or the other. Nowadays, even in Orthodox congregations, they'll include both the mother and the father's name. They may change the order. Sometimes it's the mother, then the father, but they have it. And Pastor Bruce, as far as the marriage ceremony is concerned, they make a distinction between the not the kiddushin, not the wedding ceremony, which in most of the time follows the cultural patterns of North America or Europe or Israel, wherever it might be. But the erusin or the nisuin, which is the legal documentation, that's the father only, because only the males can sign legal documents according to traditional Jewish law. But when it comes to the ceremony, then it just whether the father brings in the bride, whether the mother escort, whether they both escort, whether the mother leading the bride around 7 times, whatever it might be, those are all local custom.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate
Thank
that. Joanne, just to let you know, in the Protestant church, however, both father and mother are addressed, and both father and mother are blessed, just so you'll know that, for dedications and or baptisms.
Thank you.
Just so you'll know.
Thank you. David.
It's actually Wendy.
This is Wendy.
Joanne, I found what you said extremely interesting because you were so emphatic that if the mother was going to be noted, that the father had to be also. And one of the things I have always, I hate to say this, disliked about Jewish tradition, especially in an Orthodox shul, is how the women, it was very chauvinistic. Women sat up in the cattle car while the men got to be praying, and men really were touted more than the women. So the fact that they were touting the woman, and you were saying they should also do the husband, which I agree with, it's sort of about time they said the woman does a whole lot. So that was just one of the things I was thinking about. And then in the Catholic weddings, and I've only been really part of almost one of them. That was when our daughter, we're a mixed family. And when our daughter got married, they got married in a Catholic church. And originally she had the whole processional all figured out. And right before it, she looked at me and said, "Mom, you and David can't go down the aisle. Parents aren't going down." And I went, okay. So we sat down, but I noticed her in-laws, who are also Catholic, were still waiting in the processional. And then just as they started, I watched the two of them walk in very, very hurt because they kicked them out of the processional also. So I never realized there was an exact order to who, what, when. You know, when we had our marriage wedding, they just said, okay, do it as you want, it's your wedding. So it was very interesting, I thought, in how it all worked out.
And well, just to finish Wendy's comment, I wanted to announce that on Wednesday, Wendy and I celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary.
Yay.
Well, congratulations. Excellent.
Well,
Excellent.
Wow.
And at this point, I think since Torah allows hiatus to occur, I want to give Susanna the floor, just because she has been waiting in the wings. She has prepared a little something about this, and using some other sources concerning the in part the plagues, in part the tribes of Israel, and other aspects to this, to Passover and like that. And so I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne. It's only going to take about 5 minutes, but I'm sure there'll be, after today, I'm sure there'll be more discussion following what she says.
Okay, now this time my computer's not going to go haywire with all the sounds and everything that happened the last time. I put together a few slides in a PowerPoint, so I'm going to switch over to that, and then we'll go from there. Okay, share, and
Good.
yeah, okay. I thought it would totally go to the slideshow, but we'll work with this. Okay, this is a little talk about the Hebrews being in Egypt. As I started to say a couple, 3 weeks ago, there's controversy where it's been said by, and I'll call them mainstream archaeology, that there's no evidence that the Hebrews were in Egypt. However, if the timeline is moved earlier, there is evidence. And this has been put together in a book called Origins of the Hebrews by Dr. Douglas Petrovich. Now, I have not read his book yet. I did watch a series of 4 interviews he did on his book and his work. So here is the proposed timeline that he's working with. And I will comment that it's not only him. There are others who are also working with this timeline. So what we can see here is that he's suggesting that in 1876 BCE, that Jacob was in Egypt, and that Moses was born in 1526, and that the Exodus took place in 1446. So let's take a look at the pharaohs here. Oh, wait a second. I don't know why that didn't, okay, I had modified this slide. Oh, hang on, I opened up the wrong PowerPoint. Just let me close. Don't save, okay. All right, sorry about that. I have to go back and here we go.
There it
Okay, now this is a partial list of the pharaohs. Hope I say this right. Sesostris II, he was the pharaoh of the dreams, and if we want to say the time of plenty. And during his reign, there was a dike was built for irrigation, and its name was called Bar Yosef, which is the canal of Joseph. And that particular irrigation was extremely important because it opened up more lands for irrigation so that they could grow more crops and so forth in order to prepare for the famine that is to come. And then Sesostris III, he was the pharaoh during the time of the famine. And he did something kind of interesting. After the famine, which was 7 years, during the 8th year, he started to build forts and granaries going south, down the Nile, along the south. And there, for whatever reason, Egypt and the Nubians did not get along, but knowing that the Nubians were in a really weakened state, he waged warfare against them and conquered them. And later on, that will become important. Let's see, there's really not much to say about Amenhotep III, but Amenhotep, he was the pharaoh. Let's see, when did I say Moses was born? 1526. So he was in charge he died shortly before Moses was born. And Queen Hatshepsut, it's thought, and Dr. Petrovich goes into detail in his book, but it's thought that she was the one that pulled Moses out of the river, out of the Nile River. And afterwards, well, not right away, but sometime later in the future, Egypt obliterated her name and her cartouche and whatever they could to get rid of her. And the thinking is that it was because she saved Moses, and through Moses, Egypt had suffered a humiliating defeat. And I highlighted this in bold because the pharaoh that Petrovich believes was the one who was dealing with Moses was Amenhotep II. And his reign was 1453 through 1416 and fits perfectly in with Moses and the date of the Exodus. Now, getting back to Sesostris III, when he was attacking Nubia, I said that he built the forts and granaries. Another thing happened. He was, again, the pharaoh that was in charge during the famine. Because of what Joseph did, people, when they needed food, they could sell their possessions and land and belongings, whatever they had. And then the last thing they would have to sell would be themselves. So at the time, the pharaohs, even though they were in charge of Egypt, they were a little bit on the weak side. And there were these positions that would kind of be equivalent to our governors, our state governors. And they were called nomars. Well, they all of a sudden just disappeared from the Egyptian record. And the thinking is that this was during the famine. And the thinking was that they got to the point where they sold themselves to get food. So with them gone, that gave the pharaoh total and complete control over Egypt. So all the pharaohs of the north were deeply indebted to Joseph and all that he had done for them. So the pharaoh, and there is some other evidence, I'm kind of skipping around here. In this place called Avaris, which is where they thought the Israelites were living, they found barrels of animals, and there was this one, like, I don't know if you call it a grave or a pit or whatnot, but the majority of these animals were goats and sheep that were less than a year old. So the thinking was that that was all the Passover sacrifice. And then in the hieroglyphs, and I'm not quite sure when this was found, but the names Joseph, Manassas, Ephraim, Sechem, who was the grandson of Manassas, those names have been found in the hieroglyphs. Oh, whoops. And here's the canal of Joseph. Let's see. Oh, I said that one. Did that one. Okay, and here's Avaris. It's the most well excavated location in this part of the world. And there are archaeologists, they'll say that many of them don't want to go against the mainstreams and they're afraid they'll lose their funding, and so they don't want to say Israelites. So what they say is that there's a large population of Seminites in the area. Now, interestingly enough, and this was not part of Dr. Petrovich's interviews. Well, here, just let me, well, that's not important. Well, not to what I'm gonna say next. There was a report that came out yesterday. It was reported in the Jerusalem Post and the Times of Israel. And what you're looking at here is like a lead tablet that kind of got folded over, and it was found on Mount Ebal, which is very close to Joshua's altar.
Ebal, E-B-A-L.
Ebal, I'm sorry,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
sorry. And the person who was in charge of this is the doctors for the excavations and such. Yeah, Ebal, sorry. I'm talking like a New Englander, adding R's where none exist. So anyways, he called it, I don't know why they called it an amulet, but he believes that it dates back to the Bronze Age or as early as 1400 BC. And it's older than any other Hebrew script that has been published by at least 200 years. And he feels, well, I guess the whole team did, that it changes the timeline of the Exodus from Egypt and subsequent entry into Israel. And if you wanted, it took a while because this thing was folded over and it required all kinds of special work and this and that and the other thing. But if you're curious as to what was written, this is what was written. Cursed, 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 cursed by the God Yahweh. You will die cursed, cursed you will surely die. Cursed by Yahweh, cursed, cursed, cursed. I don't think I would be wanting to go to Mount Ebal anytime soon. Let's see if I can. There's some stuff here at the bottom. But this script was referred to as a prototype something or other, and it predates the Phoenician script, and it gives it provides evidence that Moses and some others would have had the ability to write, that there was a written language. So this find could be the basis for a paradigm shift, so to speak. And I just find it very exciting. And that's it.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Yes, Rabbi.
Well, Marty, if you want me to kind of put this into perspective,
Sure.
it's in the book of Numbers that when the children of Israel will occupy the promised land, that one group goes to the top of Mount Ebal, the other group goes to the top of Mount Gerizim, and they yell back and forth curses and blessings. That's the context of what's referred to here. And so the question is, if that wasn't going to take place until after the children of Israel had already occupied the land, they'd already conquered the land, and it's up in the north, in the central part of the Galilee is where these two mountains that face each other are. How do you date when they would have conquered? So that's after Joshua and Jericho, and that's after all the others. How do you date that? That's the underlying question of what Suzanne's research is talking about.
Yeah, and they did go into that, but I didn't feel comfortable enough to talk about it. So yes, there were two mountains, and one was the blessing and one was the curse.
Right.
Oh, sorry for the misprint there. It should say thanks. Anyway, no, but really, that required a good deal of work. So thank you. Yes, Don. Don, you're muted.
Some more evidence that resets the timetable is the Ipuwer papyrus that's in the Amsterdam, Netherlands, and that recounts the plagues very closely to the biblical version, except it's offset by a few hundred years early in terms of lining up with the dynasties.
The archaeology, all I'm going to say about Mideastern archaeology is that there are many ideas out there, and the dating of different events and different interpretations of hieroglyphics and things like that. It does make it rather difficult. And so, all I can say is we know that in our additions, like in Plout, and it was mentioned, I think Larry mentioned something a few weeks ago about the timeline. Is it 216 years or is it 530? I mean, 430 years. For all the, for the for this to take all of these events to take place, I just don't know. But here in scripture it says 400. I'll go by 400. Okay, Larry. Larry, you're muted.
Thank you, Suzanne, so much. That really adds another whole perspective to it. Now,
Yeah.
Marty, you said the difficulty in Mideast archaeology. Right here in the Southwest, I've traveled with Crow Canyon Archaeological Conservancy with archaeologists trained in a so-called scientific method and Native Americans from different tribes. They did not have a written language. They have an oral history and tradition. And listening carefully to all these different points of view, we find sometimes there are really convergences, different ways of saying the same thing. Sometimes there are differences, but often our Torah is based on historical evidence.
Correct.
So
Correct.
this was a wonderful addition from Suzanne, and thanks again.
Thank you. Yes, Rabbi.
I just give one simple example for those who are a little wondering about all this. So when we're trying to affix dates, okay, and as Larry just said, certainly all the more so in the Middle East, it was all this story and the history was handed down orally, okay, for generations. There was storytellers and that would
Right.
hand it down, and then how well did you hear it? Did you hear it exactly, or did you?
Telephone.
So the
Right.
perfect example is that with the word Rav, which means many, or Harbe, which means many or much, and then there's Arba, that means four, or Arba'im, which means 40. So if someone's speaking quickly and they said it was Arba'im Shana or Arba Shanim or Arbe Shanim, what did they say? Did they say 40? Did they say many? I just don't know. And so they said, okay, we're going to say it was 40. And on and on and on. Coincidence that the number 40 shows up so many times, in unrelated events, it could very well have been just the many rather than 40
Right.
specifically.
Good point. So it makes it exciting because it generates a lot of discussion. Yes, Suzanne.
I did leave a couple things out. In 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1, there's a reference from Solomon and when he was doing his thing. And it references the exodus of the Israelites. And if you use that verse and the numbers, it ties in with Dr. Petrovich's idea. And then there was something else I wanted to say. Oh, that the Pharaohs from the south were the ones who had no knowledge of what Joseph had done.
Mhm.
And so they were, and Petrovich said that we like to think that the Israelites were in slavery for 400 years, but he said that's not true. And based on the research and all, it appears that they were enslaved for about 113 or 114 years. And prior to that, they were making money from trade through the turquoise mines and also from wine. growing wine and such. So his book has a lot more than what was, in the interviews. And he also wrote a book prior to this one on the Hebrew alphabet and language, although the name escapes me at the moment.
Okay.
There you
Well,
have it.
I think
Thank you.
that's good. Then, of course, you have there is another school of thought that has the pharaohs of the north who and the belief is that they were lunar worshipers as opposed to solar worshipers from the south, and that the hiatus that you showed is due to a serious conflict between them. And as a result, during which the South won, okay, the Aten, if you will, or Ra believers, and so the sun won and the moon receded from history for the Egyptian pharaohs. So take your pick. There are a lot of ideas thrown out by the archaeologists. Let's put it this way: no one is around, today that was living back then to ask questions of. So it's hard. Anyway, we'll end here. I know we ran over a little bit.